I sat motionless on the cracked old leather chair in my tiny office on the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri. The flickering neon light overhead buzzed weakly as if it were about to die, casting a sickly glow over the desk buried in papers. They were no longer documents. They were death sentences. Bright red foreclosure notices from the bank, lawsuits from suppliers stacked like gravestones, and worst of all, the resignation letters. One after another from the very teammates who had helped me build this company over the past 8 years. My name is Jackson Larkin, 34 years old, owner of a construction management software company that now exists in name only. I stared at the sea of negative numbers on my laptop screen and listened to the rain hammering the window like nails being driven into a coffin. 8 years. 8 years of sweat and tears poured into this dream child of mine. Now it was dying. Longtime clients suddenly terminated contracts. Employees walked out because they weren't getting paid. I tried everything. Banks refused new loans. Selling my beloved pickup only covered last month's payroll. Mortgaging the apartment I lived in still left me short. I begged for extensions, even bowed my head to old clients. Not a single door opened, only cold slams in my face. I clutched the final foreclosure notice so hard the paper crumpled in my fist. My fingers trembled. My mind spun. And then in one last desperate flicker of hope, I thought of my parents. Murphy Larkin and Marie Larkin, the people who gave me life, raised me, but never truly loved me. My father, Murphy, 63, owner of a well-known building materials company in Missouri. Rich, respected in the real estate world. Big house, luxury cars, connections everywhere. A single nod from him, a short-term loan of a few $100,000, and I could breathe again. My mother, Marie, 60, always impeccably dressed, hair perfectly coiffed, heavy makeup. She preferred bragging about other people's children to ever being proud of her own. I knew they were cold. I knew they were ruthlessly practical. But still, they were my parents, right? Blood is thicker than water. I told myself that as I drove my beat-up replacement car to the supermarket and picked out the most expensive fruit basket. Glossy grapes, bright red cherries, fragrant mangoes wrapped in sparkling cellophane. I stood in front of the store mirror, straightened my tie, smoothed my hair, and whispered to my reflection, "Just lower yourself a little. They'll help." Their house sat in the wealthiest neighborhood in the city. A white European-style mansion, tall iron gates, manicured gardens. I rang the bell, heart pounding. The maid opened the gate and looked at me with faint surprise. It had clearly been a long time. My mother came to the door, red lips curving into a stiff smile. "Oh, Jackson, we haven't seen you in ages." My father sat sprawled on the living room sofa, eyes glued to the financial news, remote in hand, not even glancing up when I walked in. I gently set the fruit basket on the glass coffee table. It made the slightest clink. Dad shot an irritated glance over as if that tiny sound had disturbed him. I forced an awkward smile. "I brought these for you, the best they had." Mom flicked her eyes at the basket, frowned slightly as if it were nothing special, then adjusted the table runner and wiped an invisible fingerprint off the glass. Her familiar way of showing displeasure without saying it outright. Dinner was served. Sizzling steaks, fragrant pepper sauce, red wine shimmering in crystal glasses. They ate slowly, elegantly. I could barely swallow, my heart was racing. I waited until dessert before daring to speak, voice soft and shaking. "Mom, Dad, there's something I need to tell you. My company is in very serious trouble." I told them everything. Clients pulling out, partners betraying me, cash flow dried up, bankruptcy just weeks away. I couldn't look them in the eye. I just stared down at my plate of cake. The silence was chilling. Then my father gave a dry, mocking laugh that cut straight through my chest. "Trouble? What exactly have you ever accomplished worth calling trouble?" He set his knife and fork down with a sharp clack, eyes ice cold. "I told you years ago. Stop dreaming about that software nonsense. Get into construction like me, that's the only safe path. And look at you now, collapsed and running home crying to mommy and daddy. My mother jumped in, voice shrill as always. Other people's sons start companies at 25 and make millions. You're 34 and you've driven yours into the ground. I'm embarrassed in front of my friends, Jackson. I tried to explain, voice breaking. I've done everything I could. I just need a short-term loan. I'll pay it back as soon as... Pay it back? Dad burst out laughing, tapping the table. You think I print money? I'm not throwing cash into your black hole. Only incompetence let a company crash this badly. Mom nodded, glancing at the fruit basket like it was trash. Son, you're grown now. Take responsibility. Don't drag the whole family into your mess. And I've heard you still owe your employees their wages? How shameful. I dropped to my knees, literally. Right there in their elegant dining room, tears streaming. Dad, Mom, I'm sorry. I just need one last chance. My father stood up and pointed at the door. Get out. I don't have a failure for a son. Then he grabbed the fruit basket I had so carefully chosen, turned it upside down. Cherries, grapes, apples rolled and scattered across the cold marble floor with a sickening clatter that hammered into my skull. Get out of my house, before I call security, he growled, face flushed with rage. I rose on shaking legs and walked out. The rain was still pouring. I had no umbrella. Rainwater mixed with tears ran down my face. I drove home through the pitch-black night, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. My heart felt crushed in someone's fist. My last hope had gone dark. The people who should have been my strongest lifeline had just pushed me off the cliff themselves. I returned to the apartment. The moment I opened the door, the familiar musty smell rushed out, the scent of a place that had long since lost any trace of warmth. I didn't turn on the light. The darkness swallowed the room, perfectly mirroring the weight crushing my chest. I slid down the wall and sat on the cold floor, back against the peeling paint, head bowed between my knees. I couldn't even cry anymore. My tears had run dry a long time ago. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, out of an old childhood habit, my eyes drifted toward the small bookshelf by the window. There, among dusty technical manuals and a few faded photographs, stood a little walnut frame, its finish worn silver with age. I reached for it in the dark, fingers trembling as they brushed the dust-covered glass. In the photo, 3 people beamed at the camera. An 8-year-old me, hair cropped short, grinning wide with the ridiculous gap where my 2 front teeth had just fallen out. To my left, Grandpa Leonard Larkin, silver hair gleaming, eyes squinted in laughter, his arm clamped around my shoulders as if afraid I'd fly away. To my right, Uncle Ben Davenport, the big man with the gentle smile, throwing up a victory sign like he'd just won the Super Bowl. Just looking at that picture, an entire sky of memories came crashing back so hard I had to grip the wall to keep from collapsing. I saw myself as a little boy again, running barefoot through Grandpa's old house on the outskirts of town. The backyard bursting with green vegetables, the tiny woodworking shed he jokingly called the real man's laboratory. My parents were never truly present in none of those warm memories. They were always busy. Meetings, clients, bragging about their ever-growing building materials empire. The rare times they came home, all I ever heard were cold remarks. Jackson got a 90 in math? That's average. Everyone else's kid gets perfect hundreds. You only won the state programming contest? Those childish awards are useless. Stop daydreaming and study construction like your father. That's the only reliable career. Software is too unstable. I learned early that no achievement was ever enough to make them proud. I also learned that if I wanted praise, wanted hugs, I should never wait for them. I bandaged my own scraped knees, cooked my own meals when I was hungry, taught myself to code on the ancient computer Grandpa gave me. Grandpa Leonard was my entire sky, the only light in that cold childhood. He was a veteran who'd seen combat overseas, retired early because of a leg wound that forced him to walk with a cane. But that cane never slowed him down. He always wore the same faded t-shirt and jeans worn at the knees, smelling of pine shavings and pipe tobacco. He taught me how to drive a nail straight, how to fish in the pond behind the house, and how to keep a warm heart even when the world outside was harsh and unforgiving. And he often took me to Uncle Ben Davenport's place. Ben was a giant of a man with a voice like summer thunder and a smile that melted ice. His house was already impressive back then, yet he still brewed his own herbal tea and baked chocolate chip cookies for me with his own hands. He'd say, "You're the grandson of my best friend, so you're my grandson too." The two old men would sit and tell me stories from the war. How they shared a foxhole in the jungle, how Grandpa risked his life under fire to drag a badly wounded Ben to safety. Ben always said, "Your grandpa saved my life and never once asked for anything in return. That's why he's not just my friend, he's my brother." I grew up surrounded by swirling wood shavings, the cheerful ring of hammers, afternoons spent cross-legged on Ben's floor, glue on my fingers, building model ships and airplanes. Uncle Ben taught me, whatever you make it right, even if it's just a tiny chair. I'll never forget the day I snapped the propeller off a model plane and burst into tears, terrified of being scolded. Ben just smiled, ruffled my hair, and said, "Broken? Then we make it again, son. A real man isn't someone who never fails. He's the one who starts over, second time, third time, until it works." Time passed. Everyone got busy in their own way. I saw Uncle Ben less and less. Visits to the workshop grew rare, long talks with Grandpa became irregular. But whenever Ben did appear, his smile and warmth were exactly the same as always. Their friendship never changed, not even a little. To them, money and status meant nothing compared to the bond forged in life and death moments. They truly were family. Those years were the only warmth in my otherwise cold childhood. Then Grandpa died. Lung cancer. He was gone in 3 months. Before he closed his eyes for the last time, he gripped my hand with surprising strength and rasped, "Jackson, if one day you fall into the deepest pit with no way out, go find Uncle Ben. He won't turn his back on you. I trust him more than my own life, so I trust he'll treat you like his own son." I nodded through sobs, but I was young, thought I was invincible, believed I'd never need anyone's help. Life swept me away. College, startup, company, pressure, deadlines, all-nighters. Visits to Uncle Ben dwindled. Christmas cards grew scarce, birthday calls stopped. The last time we spoke was almost 10 years ago. I kept telling myself, I'll visit when things calm down. But things never calmed down. And now here I was at the bottom of that pit. I pressed the photo frame to my chest, hugging it like a dying loved one. Tears fell again, this time not from humiliation but from memory. Grandpa's warm hugs, the smell of pine, Uncle Ben's voice saying, "Do it again." I rummaged through an old drawer, fingers shaking in the dark. Papers, bills, mementos buried under dust. Finally, I found it. A business card yellowed at the edges, but the letters still clear. Ben Davenport, chairman and founder, Davenport Group. Real estate, infrastructure, investment. Below in Grandpa's shaky blue ballpoint pen, the phone number he had written with so much love and hope. I ran my thumb over the card again and again, terrified it would vanish. Grandpa's last words echoed in my head. "He won't turn his back on you." I didn't dare hope too much. 10 silent years, would he even remember me? A failed stranger showing up like a beggar. But I had nothing left to lose. I wasn't asking for money. I just wanted advice from the man my grandfather trusted more than blood. I set the card on the table and stared at it for a long time in the darkness. Outside, the rain still poured, wind whistling through the broken window. Yet for the first time in weeks, a tiny spark flickered in my chest. Not grand hope, just a fragile warmth. Maybe one door hadn't slammed shut yet. Maybe there was still one person in this world who had never turned away from me. I closed my eyes, pressed my forehead to the old frame and whispered, "Grandpa." I'll try. I'll call Uncle Ben. And if he turns me away too, at least I'll have kept my promise to you until the very end. I sat there until almost dawn, clutching the photograph and the business card, holding on to the last bit of warmth my childhood had never truly abandoned me with. I don't know how long I sat there. Only when the first pale light of dawn slipped through the torn curtains and fell across the cold floor did I snap out of it and realize the night had passed. My whole body was stiff from staying in one position too long. I forced myself to stand, took a deep breath, picked up the phone and dialed. Each ring felt like a blade slicing into my heart. 1 ring, 2, 3. I closed my eyes, bracing for the recorded voice saying the number was no longer in service. But then someone answered. It was Uncle Ben's voice, deep, warm, calm, exactly the same as in my childhood memories. "Who's this calling me?" I choked. My throat locked up. It took forever to get the words out. "Uncle, it's me, Jackson Larkin, Leonard Larkin's grandson." A brief silence. Then his voice broke with joy and emotion. I could hear the tremble. "Jackson? My God, little Jackson, I thought you'd forgotten your old uncle. How are you, son?" I almost started crying right there on the phone. His voice was still as warm as ever, unchanged. No blame, no distance, just pure happiness, like he'd just found a piece of himself that had been missing. After a few quick greetings, I drew a deep breath and said, voice shaking, "Uncle, I'm in really bad trouble. My company is about to go bankrupt. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm not asking for anything, and I just need your advice." There wasn't a second of hesitation on the other end. "Come to the house tomorrow morning. Same address. I'll be waiting." I hung up and sat frozen, phone still pressed to my ear. I couldn't believe what I'd heard. He didn't ask questions, just one sentence. "Come, I'll be waiting." The next morning, I put on the only suit I still owned, collar worn thin, got into my rattling old car and drove out to the Missouri countryside. The address he gave was deep in the rolling green hills. 10 years had passed since I'd driven this road. The asphalt was still smooth, pine forests towering on both sides, the air impossibly clean. My heart pounded the entire way. Then the massive iron gates appeared and I nearly slammed on the brakes. Uncle Ben's house had changed beyond recognition. It was now an enormous estate, classic European architecture blended with modern lines, red-tiled roof, natural stone walls, a sparkling man-made lake, perfectly manicured gardens stretching as far as the eye could see. At the entrance, a polished brass sign read, "Davenport Group, Headquarters." I parked, hands and feet numb. The man who once sat on the floor with me gluing model airplanes was now the master of an empire. A guard opened the gate with a polite smile. "The boss is expecting you in the main house, sir." I stepped into a vast entrance hall where my footsteps echoed. Soaring ceilings, a gigantic crystal chandelier, mirror-bright marble floors, the faint scent of sandalwood. I stood there feeling small and out of place like a beggar who had wandered into a palace. Then I heard it, the soft tap of a cane on wood, a sound that tore straight into my heart. Uncle Ben appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He was almost 80 now, hair snow-white, back slightly stooped, but his eyes still sharp and his smile exactly the same as always. He wore a blue plaid shirt, khaki pants and slippers, looking like any old retiree tending his garden. "Jackson, Lord, it's been too long, come here, boy." He leaned on his cane with one hand and opened the other wide. I rushed up the stairs and threw my arms around him. He slapped my back hard, voice thick. "You've gotten thin, son. Come on, let's talk." He led me not to some cold boardroom, but to a cozy living room. A fire crackled in the hearth. The leather sofas were soft and inviting. And on the coffee table sat a pot of herbal tea and a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies, the smell exactly like when I was a kid. We talked like no time had passed at all. What shocked me most was that Uncle Ben, the man who used to bake cookies for me, was now known as Missouri's quiet billionaire, head of the mighty Davenport Group, with private jets, a sprawling estate, and thousands of employees. Yet in front of me, he was still the same humble, warm man he'd always been. I told him about my life after Grandpa died, how I'd fended for myself while my parents focused on their business, how I'd built my company from nothing. Throughout the entire conversation, Uncle Ben listened intently to every word. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine, filled with nothing but sincerity. Not a hint of judgment, not a single frown, not one look of pity. Only the deep respect and understanding of a man who had lived a long, hard life. When I finished, I bowed my head, too afraid to meet his eyes, terrified I'd see disappointment. But he simply placed a hand on my shoulder. "Look at me, Jackson." I looked up. His eyes were shining. There was a new intensity in them, not doubt, but recognition. He saw what I had tried to hide, the quiet desperation behind every sentence. Maybe it was the way my hands kept clenching, the way my voice cracked when I mentioned my family, or the long silences when I swallowed my feelings. Uncle Ben rested his hand gently on my shoulder and said quietly, "Jackson, there's something else you haven't told me yet, isn't there?" That one sentence was enough to make my chest seize up. He saw right through me more clearly than anyone ever had. I bowed my head, my throat bitter as if I'd swallowed sand. I hesitated for a long time, then finally let it all pour out. I told him about the pouring rain that night, about the expensive fruit basket I had so carefully chosen being knocked from my hands and scattered across the cold marble floor, about my father's cutting words, "Only a failure lets a company collapse this badly," about my mother calling me a burden, a family shame, about the white mansion door slamming behind me like the final nail in the coffin of my last hope. When I finished, the room fell into a silence so heavy I could only hear the firewood crackling in the hearth. Uncle Ben said nothing at first. He just let out a long, heavy sigh, as though he were carrying my pain himself, then patted my back gently, the way you comfort a deeply wounded child. "There, you've told it all. Feel any lighter, son?" I nodded, tears silently rolling down my trembling hands. He poured more herbal tea into my cup, his voice calm and steady again. "Now tell me about the company. In detail. Don't hide anything." And I did. This time I truly told him everything, leaving no dark corner untouched. I told him how cash flow had completely dried up last quarter, how our biggest client ended the contract with one short, cold email, how an old partner spread vicious rumors that destroyed our reputation overnight, how I'd slept in the office on a thin sleeping bag, how I sold my beloved truck, mortgaged my apartment, how I'd knelt before banks begging for extensions, how employees handed in resignation letters because there was no salary left to pay them. I even told him my own fatal mistakes, expanding too fast without proper planning, trusting the wrong old classmate, failing to build an emergency fund. No sugarcoating, no excuses. I laid it all bare, as though I were finally lifting a boulder that had crushed my chest for months. Uncle Ben listened to every word. He didn't interrupt, didn't show excessive emotion. Occasionally he asked questions sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "What are the exact monthly fixed operating costs right now? What is your core business model built on, and what is the real gross margin? How did you adjust your 3-year growth strategy when the market shifted?" I answered each one honestly, surprised at my own sudden courage. I had nothing left to lose, so I had no face left to save. When I finished, he sat silent for a very long time. He stared into the fire, fingers lightly drumming the wooden armrest as if assembling every piece in his mind. I sat there, heart hammering, waiting for the final verdict. Would he refuse? Pity me? Send me away like my parents had? But he only said one short sentence, perfectly calm. "I need a little more time to think. Go home. I'll reach out. I'll reach out." I stood, bowed, and left, mind in turmoil. I had no idea whether I had made a good impression or ruined everything. I only knew I had just exposed my ugliest wounds to the most respected man I had ever known. 3 days later, the phone rang. It was him. "Come back tomorrow morning. I have something to tell you in person. I barely slept, my head spinning with every possible scenario. The next morning I drove back to the estate, more nervous than the first time, heart trying to pound its way out of my chest. I walked across the gleaming marble hall, mind racing with fear of what waited ahead, when I suddenly collided with someone. A young woman about 27, tall, long black hair tied in a neat ponytail, wearing a fitted charcoal gray business dress and sharp heels. She was looking down at her phone. I was lost in thought. Our shoulders bumped hard. I immediately bowed. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean..." She looked up, ice blue eyes so sharp they stopped me cold. Beautiful, strikingly beautiful, but in a way that made you wary rather than stare. She scanned me head to toe, lips pressed tight, then said in a voice like frozen solid, "You're Jackson Larkin, aren't you?" I nodded. Before I could speak, she continued, voice slicing like a blade. "I overheard your conversation with my grandfather last time. And now you're back to cling to him, to beg for his money, right?" I stood frozen, blood rushing to my face. Later I learned she was Alara Davenport, Ben's granddaughter and Chief Marketing Strategy Officer of Davenport Group. She kept going, tone hard but threaded with unmistakable protectiveness. "You show up the moment your company collapses, don't you? Just like all the others who've tried to take advantage of my grandfather. I know your type. Good at playing nice, playing pitiful, spinning sob stories to milk money from an old man. But I'm warning you, you will not touch a single cent of his. I won't let him be fooled again." I met her eyes for 1 second, said nothing. No anger, no defense. I simply gave a small bow and walked past. I heard her sharp intake of breath. She clearly hadn't expected to be completely ignored. But I didn't look back. I just kept walking toward Uncle Ben's study. When the door opened, he was sitting there with the same gentle smile. "Jackson, sit down, son." Then he slid a thick folder across the desk toward me. "For the past 3 days, I've had my team verify everything you told me. Financial records, client contracts, tax reports, internal emails, everything. And it all checks out perfectly. No lies, no exaggeration." He paused, looked me straight in the eye, voice firm. "I believe you. I believe in your honesty and your fight." I sat there as if the air had been sucked from the room, unable to breathe. "I'm going to help you. I'll inject capital immediately to cover payroll and keep the remaining staff. I'll send a restructuring team to work with you full-time. I'll reopen doors with your old partners. They still respect me. But..." His tone grew more serious than I had ever heard. "There is one condition. Your company will be merged into Davenport Group. You will continue to run the software division, but under our umbrella." I stared at the folder, my hands shaking. That company was my child, 8 years of blood and soul. The thought of handing it over tore at me. But with mountains of debt, frozen projects, and every exit blocked, I knew I had no choice. Faced with total bankruptcy, I had to accept Uncle Ben's terms, even though it felt like ripping my heart out. I looked back at him. He waited, no pressure, no rush. I took a deep breath, voice hoarse. I accept your condition, Uncle." He smiled, stood, and clapped me hard on the shoulder. "Good man. We start tomorrow." As I walked out of the study, my feet barely touched the ground. I felt one door close forever behind me, but another door, wider, brighter, had just swung open right in front of me. Whatever storms and unknown trials lay beyond it, this was still my only chance to live, my only chance to rise again. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt something like hope. Ever since the day the merger agreement was signed, I had barely left my old office, now renamed the Software Development Department, Davenport Group. I slept on the torn leather sofa, lived on online fast food, and showered in the company restroom. I personally rewrote every outdated line of code, optimized the entire system, rewrote the technical documentation, and examined every old contract for loopholes. The restructuring team Uncle Ben sent over, 5 highly experienced specialists, watched me work. and shook their heads. "You don't have to punish yourself like this, Jackson." But I did. I needed to prove that I deserved this. And the results came faster than any of us expected. In just 3 months, my small company, that once on the verge of shutting down, was running steadily again. Former clients returned after hearing Davenport Group was backing us. Ex-employees called asking to come back. I accepted them all, even though salaries were still low. Revenue tripled. Profit finally turned green. Uncle Ben even entrusted me with 3 major projects for Davenport Group itself. Smart construction management software for newly developed urban districts. Those projects exceeded every expectation. 30% faster progress, 15% lower costs, and praise from international partners. In just 6 months, the software division under my leadership contributed nearly an 8% revenue growth to Uncle Ben's billion-dollar conglomerate. I began visiting the Davenport estate almost weekly. Sometimes to report, sometimes to ask for advice, sometimes just to sit and drink tea with him. Our conversations stretched from technical topics to life, from the Vietnam War to parenting. He laughed heartily when I told him about the first time an employee hugged me crying because they finally got paid on time. He patted my shoulder and said, "You're doing great, son." But not everyone in the Davenport family was happy about my presence. Callum Davenport, 56, Uncle Ben's biological son, current CEO of the corporation, had begun looking at me with a cold, hostile gaze. Tall, slicked-back hair, custom-tailored suits, walking like everyone else should step aside for him. Every time I presented in the boardroom, he sat at the far end with his arms crossed, speaking very little, but his eyes were as sharp as knives. He called me a lucky nobody. And Carter Davenport, 29, the eldest grandson, Callum's son, was even more blatant. A notorious Missouri playboy. Luxury cars, $500,000 watches, women swapped like outfits. Every time I showed up at the estate, Carter leaned against the wall with a mocking smirk. "Oh look, the guy who saved his little crappy company is here again." One afternoon, after a 3-hour meeting with Uncle Ben, Callum blocked my path in the long marble hallway. He stood squarely in front of me, hands in his pockets, voice low and razor sharp. "Jackson, know your place. Don't even dream of squeezing your way into Davenport Group. What you have now is nothing but a tiny bit of success, meaningless in a billion-dollar corporation." Carter stood beside his father, sneering, adding with his usual aggressive tone, "Yeah, you're just playing the obedient grandson to win over my grandpa. Don't think a few successful projects mean you can sit at the same table as my family. I know exactly what you're after. Scraps of pity and opportunity from an old man about to hit the grave." The father and son stood there like they were marking their territory, their voices and eyes trying to force me to bow, to fear them, to back off. I looked straight at them, not angry, not afraid. I simply nodded slightly and said calmly, "Yes, I understand what you're saying." Then I walked past them, not fast, not slow. I heard Carter growl behind me, "That bastard!" But I didn't turn back. I had long been used to pressure and prejudice. Reacting would only make things worse. I chose silence and continued working. Ironically, that calmness of mine only frustrated them more. They were like men punching empty air. The more they swung, the more exhausted they became, while I kept moving forward one steady step at a time on the path I had chosen. That night I sat in my old office, now freshly renovated, staring at the monitor full of green growth charts. I smiled to myself. They could hate me. They could look down on me, but they could not deny the results I brought. And I knew Uncle Ben was watching everything. He hadn't said a word, but I could feel it. He was waiting to see how I would handle the first undercurrents the Davenport family had thrown at me. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." Here is the full, accurate, and faithful English translation of your text. Time passed so quickly I barely noticed it. Just 8 months after the merger, the software division under my management had become the fastest-growing department in the entire Davenport group. Uncle Ben trusted me more and more. He assigned me bigger and more critical tasks. A comprehensive management system for 3 new urban districts in Texas, an AI platform that forecast construction costs for a European partner, and even a blockchain system to track material origins across the entire supply chain. Every time I presented a new idea, he would simply look at me for a moment, then nod and say, short but firm, "Do it, son. I trust you." He also let me attend every top-level board meeting, meetings that had previously been reserved only for Callum Carter and a handful of major shareholders. I sat at the corner of the long-polished conference table right beside Uncle Ben, presenting numbers, proposing strategic solutions, and listening to the future plans of the entire corporation. Each time I could clearly feel 2 cold streams of air coming from the opposite end of the table. Callum's razor-sharp glare and Carter's mocking smirk. They no longer bothered to hide their displeasure. It showed right on their faces, growing more obvious by the day. Nearly every proposal I made, Callum would shoot down without hesitation. He sat there with his arms crossed, voice low but sharp like a blade. "Not feasible? Too risky? We don't need to gamble on an outsider's ideas." Carter was far more blatant. He often cut me off mid-sentence, scoffing and throwing out sarcastic remarks designed to humiliate me in front of the entire leadership team. "Guess Jackson thinks he's a genius now?" Or, "This proposal sounds more like a kid's game than a plan for a billion-dollar corporation." The conference room would fall dead silent. No one dared defend me. Then the major crisis hit. A huge project in Florida ran into serious trouble. The subcontractor fell behind schedule and costs rose by 12%. Carter, the one in charge of that project, immediately dumped all the blame onto me during the quarterly leadership meeting. He stood up, pointed at the slide I was presenting, voice shrill with hostility. "It's all because of Jackson's management software failing to detect risks early. If he hadn't interfered, the project would have been done months ago." The room grew heavy as lead. Every eye turned to me. I stood up and calmly refuted him point by point, presenting system logs, early warning emails, the very ones Carter had ignored. But no one dared take my side. They feared Callum and Carter, feared losing their positions, feared retaliation. I stood there alone in that vast boardroom, swallowed by a wave of isolation. For a moment I thought I would break. But in those suffocating days of pressure, I unexpectedly found a steady anchor, an anchor named Ilara. After the heated confrontation in the main hall weeks earlier, I thought she would openly despise me. But gradually I noticed she often appeared in the places I went, the hallway leading to the meeting rooms, the back garden of the estate, even the parking garage. At first it was just curt nods, then short questions. "Is the Florida project stable now?" Or, "Have you eaten? You look exhausted." I answered briefly, politely. So did she. But each time she lingered a little longer, her eyes a little softer, the corner of her lips lifting slightly, almost like a smile. I could tell she was watching me quietly, and she had realized I wasn't the money-hungry opportunist clinging to her grandfather that she once imagined. One late afternoon, after staying at the estate working with Uncle Ben until late, I stepped into a dim corridor and saw Ilara sitting on a stone bench in the garden, holding a cup of fruit juice, staring into the dark. I intended to walk past quietly, but she called me, her voice gentle. "Jackson, will you sit with me for a moment?" We sat together under the warm yellow light, silent for 10 long minutes. Then she spoke first, her voice soft yet clear. "I misjudged you. I'm sorry." I turned to look at her. Under the light, she was breathtaking, not cold like before, but with the quiet beauty of someone who was finally opening up, shedding her armor. From that moment, our accidental encounters became intentional ones. She waited for me in the garage, handing me a hot coffee when I worked late. I brought her a hamburger when she skipped lunch after endless meetings. We began talking more, about work, strategy, and the invisible wounds we both carried. She shared the pressure of always having to prove she wasn't just the pampered granddaughter of the Davenport family. I told her about my loveless childhood, about Grandpa Leonard, about the nights I thought I had no reason left to keep living. We never said the words like or love, but we both knew. A gentle yet deep feeling was growing between the two loneliest people in that enormous estate. And that feeling became my greatest source of strength during the days I was being cornered, until Callum and Carter found out. One morning, just as I stepped into my private office at headquarters, the door crashed open. Callum and Carter stormed in without knocking. Carter slammed the door, voice low and furious. "What the hell is going on between you and Alara?" Callum stepped right up to my face, voice cold as ice. "This is your final warning. End it, immediately. Alara, my daughter, is a Davenport. You're not worthy." Carter moved closer, jabbing a finger at my face. "You think dating my sister will give you a way up? Dream on. I'll make sure you're gone from here within a week if you don't back off." I stood up, and for the first time I did not stay silent. I looked directly into their eyes, my voice low but unwavering. Alara is an adult. She has the right to choose who she wants, and so do I. I'm not afraid of losing my job, my position, or anything here, but I will not let anyone insult the woman I love. The air froze. Carter lunged as if to grab my collar, but Callum raised a hand to stop him. He stared at me for a long, tense moment, then turned and pulled his son out. The door slammed shut again. I stood there, heart pounding, yet strangely relieved. For the first time, I had defended something greater than myself. And then Uncle Ben found out everything. 3 days later, during a family dinner at the estate, the first dinner I had ever been invited to, Uncle Ben stood up, holding a glass of wine, his voice echoing across the grand room. "I have watched for a long time. I see a man who is honest, resilient, who loves and protects others with all his heart. That man is not my son, not my grandson. But today I declare before the entire family and the entire leadership team, Jackson Larkin is the one person in Davenport Group whom I trust completely." The entire table fell silent. Uncle Ben turned to me, smiling warmly. "And you are also the only one I allow to call me Grandpa, if you wish." Callum's face turned pale. Carter slammed a hand on the table as if to protest, but one stern glance from Uncle Ben made him drop back into his seat. I looked at Alara. She was looking at me, eyes shimmering with emotion. I smiled at her. The storm was still there, swirling around me, but now I was no longer fighting it alone. 3 months after the night Uncle Ben publicly placed his trust in me, everything changed abruptly. His health began to deteriorate at an alarming rate. At first it was just a dry cough, then fatigue. Then he could no longer climb the second floor without gasping for breath. His personal doctor visited and diagnosed a weakened heart compounded by old age. Uncle Ben was forced into complete rest. No meetings, no signing documents, not even stepping into the garden. He lay on the large bed in the master bedroom, looking out at the shimmering lake he had once proudly shown me. I visited him almost every day. I sat beside his bed, held his hand, and told him about new projects, returning employees, and growth numbers. He smiled weakly, his eyes still bright. "Good job, son. Keep going like this and I'll have peace of mind." Alara stayed by his side day and night. She slept on the sofa in his room, cooked soup for him, fed him medicine, and changed cold towels when he had a fever. She visibly grew thinner, dark circles under her eyes, but she never left her grandfather for even a minute. And Callum and Carter, they found every excuse to avoid him. Callum was busy with shareholder meetings and Carter was in Europe signing contracts. On the rare occasions they showed up, they stood at the doorway for only a few minutes, asked a perfunctory, "How's Dad today?" and left before Uncle Ben could even answer. I saw the pain in his eyes. Pain not from illness, but from the cruel indifference of his own flesh and blood. One day when both Alara and I were sitting beside his bed, Uncle Ben held both our hands. His voice choked. "I'm proud to have 2 wonderful grandchildren like you. You must live happily, love and protect each other, understood? I nodded silently, trying not to let my tears fall. Alara threw her arms around him, sobbing, begging him not to leave her. But age and frailty spare no one. About half a year later, Uncle Ben passed away. The funeral was the most solemn I had ever seen in Missouri. Thousands came to pay respects. Partners, politicians, employees, the press. The casket lay in the grand hall of the estate, draped in white flowers. I stood beside Alara throughout the ceremony, holding her hand tightly. Callum and Carter wore black suits, expressionless, greeting guests as if attending a formal reception. Not a single tear. The tension between the Davenport family and me was thick as tar. The way they looked at me, as if they wanted to devour me alive. Right after the funeral, I received a call from Uncle Ben's personal lawyer. It was Mr. Henry Lawson, who had worked with him for 40 years. "Jackson, you must be present at the will reading tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., main conference room." I froze. Why me? Why would an outsider be summoned? The next morning, I arrived on time, dressed in a black suit, my head pounding with questions. When I pushed open the conference room door, Callum and Carter were already there, faces dark with fury. The moment they saw me, they charged toward me like two wild beasts. Callum pointed straight at my face. "What the hell are you doing here? Get out!" Carter roared, "You fraud! You have no right to be here." Before I could say a word, Alara stepped forward, positioning herself between them and me, her voice cold but resolute. "Enough. He has every right to be here. No one touches him." She looked at her father and brother, eyes red but unwavering. Callum opened his mouth to shout, but Mr. Lawson cut him off, his tone stern. "Gentlemen, Mr. Jackson Larkin's presence here is entirely lawful and explicitly requested by Mr. Ben Davenport. Please be seated." Callum and Carter's faces flushed with rage. Mr. Lawson opened the sealed envelope and began reading the will in an even tone, and the entire room erupted. 70% of my personal assets and full controlling authority of Davenport Group shall go to Jackson Larkin. 20% to my granddaughter, Alara Davenport. 5% each to my son, Callum Davenport, and my grandson, Carter Davenport. The remaining 5% to the Leonard Larkin and Ben Davenport Charitable Foundation. I stood frozen, unable to speak. Callum and Carter exploded. "Fraud! Manipulation of a dying man." Callum slammed the table so hard a chair toppled over. That bastard brainwashed him. Carter hurled a heavy wooden chair against the wall. "Fake! This will is fake!" They lunged toward the lawyer's desk, grabbing documents, threatening lawsuits, threatening prison. Mr. Lawson calmly opened his laptop and played the final recorded video of Uncle Ben, filmed just 1 week before his passing. Uncle Ben lay on the bed, his voice weak but clear. "I am fully conscious. I leave what I have built to the one most deserving. Jackson Larkin, he is the most courageous man. Like his grandfather, tough on the outside, warm-hearted within. I trust he will continue what I have begun." The video ended. The room fell silent. Callum and Carter were cornered. They spun around to glare at me, eyes bloodshot. "If you don't hand over the inheritance, you won't live to see another day." Then they stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls trembled. Only Alara, Mr. Lawson, and I remained. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, mind blank. Alara stepped toward me, gripping my hand tightly, her voice trembling but firm. "Grandpa did this for a reason. You did nothing wrong. You deserve it." I looked at her, tears falling without me realizing it. Just as I was about to leave the room, Mr. Lawson called out, "Jackson, there is one more thing." He handed me a thick envelope sealed with red wax. On it, written in Uncle Ben's trembling handwriting, "To Jackson, my son." My hands shook so badly I could hardly open it. I drove home in an almost trance-like state. The modest suburban house that Uncle Ben had once called a proper place for you to sleep had now become my only shelter in the whirlwind that was about to hit. I sank onto the sofa, set the envelope on the glass coffee table, and stared at it for a long time beneath the warm glow of the lamp. I was afraid, terrified that the moment I opened it, everything would become irreversible, and I would have to shoulder the colossal responsibility he had laid upon me. Finally, I tore it open, hands still trembling. Inside were pages dense with handwriting. Uncle Ben's script from his final days, shaky from age and illness, yet still legible, still resolute, exactly like the man himself had been his entire life. I read every line, every word, sitting motionless for hours until night had fallen completely and the streetlights outside the window flickered on. Jackson, if you are reading this, I am gone. I am not sad. I am at peace because I have found a worthy successor. This gift, 70% of Davenport Group and everything else I leave behind, is not charity. It is not merely repayment to your grandfather Leonard, who saved my life in the jungle in Vietnam all those years ago and never asked for anything in return. Leonard taught me that kindness needs no recompense, yet I still wish to repay him by passing it on to his grandson, the one who carries the same heart. You have proven everything to me these past years. You are honest to the point of naivete. You take responsibility until it breaks you. You value others even when they give you nothing in return. You work not for money, but to protect those who trusted you. You endure injustice without bitterness. You love without keeping score. Those qualities, my own blood descendants lost them long ago. I leave them little because they are not worthy of more. They already had too much and never learned its worth. I leave it to you because I trust you will use it rightly, to protect, to build, to give back to the world as your grandfather taught us both. You do not have to keep it all if you do not wish to. Choose the path that brings you peace. Let no one, blood relative or public opinion, force you to abandon your values. You are Jackson Larkin, Leonard's grandson and my son. I am proud of you. Ben. I read it over and over until I knew every word by heart. Tears soaked the pages, dripped onto my clenched fists. I realized the legacy Uncle Ben left me was not merely money or the company, it was absolute faith, the final wish of a father I had never truly had. I dropped to my knees on the floor and whispered through the tears, I promise. I will protect it all to my last breath. The days that followed were hell. Callum and Carter did not sit still. They launched the most vicious smear campaign imaginable. Rumors spread through the company like wildfire. Jackson brainwashed the old man to steal the fortune. That outsider conned a dying man. They leaked lies to the press. Tabloid articles sprouted like mushrooms. Insider sources slandering me every way possible. Davenport Group stock plunged 12% in the first week. They colluded with a few loyalists on the old board, Callum's cronies, to pressure from within. Internal emails, secret meetings, attempts to oust me before I could even settle into the chairman's seat. They even hired private investigators to tail me, leaked photos of Alara and me to smear me as the mistress inheritor. Amid the public storm, I remained unnervingly calm. I did not respond to the media. I did not argue on social media. I did not lose my temper in meetings. I just worked. Twice as hard, 3 times as hard. I met with teams, reassured employees, pushed projects forward, kept the company running smoothly even as the world outside raged. I knew they wanted me to snap, to fall into their trap so they could sue more, so the public would turn on me completely. Then it came. They sued me for contesting the will. The case went to trial 3 days later. Callum and Carter hired Missouri's most expensive legal sharks, accusing me of elder abuse, forging the will, exploiting affection. They produced psychological experts claiming Uncle Ben had late-stage Alzheimer's despite his lucidity until the end. Witnesses who said I had been at his bedside the most, as if caring for him was a crime. I sat in the defendant's chair, back straight, eyes fixed on the judge. The opposing counsel read charge after charge, presented evidence they thought would bury me. But I did not flinch. The more I listened, the calmer I became. They wanted to see me break. Instead, they saw something else. I would not break. My lawyers, Ben had appointed them himself long ago, presented evidence methodically, irrefutably. The original will, hand-signed and notarized before multiple witnesses. Video of Ben voluntarily recording his wishes with doctors, lawyers, and nurses present. Medical records proving his full mental capacity to the very last day. Texts, emails, recordings, everything showing his decision was voluntary, lucid, and meticulously reasoned. The trial lasted 3 grueling days. When the judge's gavel fell and the voice rang out, "All plaintiff claims are without legal basis. The will is entirely valid. Jackson Larkin is the lawful heir of Ben Davenport." The courtroom fell dead silent. Callum went white as paper. Carter slammed his fist on the bench, eyes bloodshot, speechless. They had lost, utterly. I walked out of the courthouse into brilliant autumn sunlight. Ilara squeezed my hand, smiling through tears. Reporters swarmed, flashes blinding, but I said only, "I will carry forward what Mr. Ben built, exactly as he wished." I formally assumed full control of Ben's estate. The Davenport Group was now mine. I carried his final wish and my silent vow that I would protect everything he had entrusted to me with my last breath. On my first day in the chairman's seat, the entire boardroom fell into a silence so thick it was suffocating. Every pair of eyes from the board fixed on me, some openly skeptical, some waiting to watch me fail, and some wearing undisguised contempt. I was only 34, had once come within inches of total bankruptcy, and now I was sitting in the chair Callum had occupied for 20 long years. I didn't give a long speech or make grand promises. I simply opened my laptop, projected the first slide onto the big screen, and said, calm and firm, "Ladies and gentlemen, starting today, we do things differently." I made 3 decisions on the spot. Cut 18% of bloated administrative costs, pour heavy investment into smart construction management software, and expand into 3 high-potential new states. No one clapped, no one nodded in approval. They just looked at one another, then back at me, waiting for me to trip. But results arrived faster than any smear campaign could spread. In the very first quarter under my leadership, group-wide revenue rose 22%. Major Texas projects finished 2 months ahead of schedule with profits exceeding 40%. The AI project in Europe landed a long-term contract from a marquee client worth double the original projection. Numbers don't lie, and they spoke for me. The board began to shift. Skeptical stares slowly turned into respect. After one meeting, a major shareholder who had once been close to Callum pulled me aside in the corridor, voice hoarse with emotion. "You're doing damn well, Jackson. Ben picked the right man." I only smiled. I didn't need empty praise. I just needed them to see I wasn't some usurper. I was the one who actually wanted to take the company higher. My bond with Ilara grew deeper than ever. After long, tense days of meetings and facing lingering public whispers about the outsider who lucked into an inheritance, I would come home to find her waiting with a simple dinner. Just homemade pasta and a bottle of red wine. She would wrap her arms around me from behind and whisper, "You must be exhausted today, aren't you?" We no longer talked much about painful pasts anymore. We talked about the future, the house we'd build by the lake, the children who would grow up surrounded by real love, the trips we'd take just to watch sunrises together. She became my greatest emotional anchor after everything the family had put me through, and I became the safe place where she could finally heal the wounds her own family had left. Seeing the positive changes in the company, Callum and Carter gradually realized the grave mistake their greed and envy had caused. One drizzly afternoon, they showed up at my office unannounced. Callum walked in first, hair much grayer, eyes sunken from months of sleepless nights. Carter followed, the old cocky playboy arrogance gone, replaced by exhaustion and genuine remorse. They stood there without sitting, and Callum spoke in a raspy voice. "Jackson, we came to apologize." I stayed quiet and let them continue. Carter bowed his head, voice trembling. "We were wrong. Wrong from start to finish. Greed and jealousy blinded us. We did everything we could to hurt you simply because we couldn't accept that Dad chose you over us. But we've seen what you've done now. You're doing it 10 times better than we ever could. The group is growing every day because of you." Callum picked up, eyes red. "We're not asking for power back. We're only asking to come back, to contribute whatever small part we can so we can all grow Davenport Group the way our father wanted." I looked at them for a long time and saw no more hatred in their eyes, only belated realization and sincere regret. I stood, extended my hand. "Welcome back. But from now on we work for the company and for Uncle Ben's wishes, not for anyone's ego." Their hands trembled as they shook mine. From that day on, the Davenport family truly changed. Callum took charge of the traditional real estate division with all his seasoned expertise. Carter was given international marketing. He worked like a man possessed to prove himself. We met weekly, argued fiercely but fairly, and respected one another. There was no longer any outsider or insider. There was only family, one family with me at the helm, guiding us all into a new and promising era. Yet life still had one final test in store for me. One beautiful morning, my assistant announced unappointed visitors. Murphy and Marie Larkin, my biological parents, stood in the company lobby dressed neatly but with anxious eyes, clutching a thick folder of documents. They looked at me, forcing awkward smiles. "Jackson, son, it's been a long time." I invited them into my private office and closed the door. They told me about their failing construction materials company, now on the verge of bankruptcy due to poor management, reckless expansion, and mountains of debt. They begged me to save them, just a short-term loan, a merger, anything I could do. They justified themselves, voices shaking. Back then we were truly desperate. We had no other choice. We didn't want to drag you into that mess. We regret it so much now. You're our son. Blood is thicker than water. I studied them for a long while, seeing every worried wrinkle, every calculating glint in their eyes. I saw the same insincerity and selfishness I remembered from years ago. They weren't apologizing for throwing me out into the rain that night. They weren't apologizing for calling me a disgrace. They were here only because I was now the head of Davenport Group, because I had succeeded. I stood, my voice calm but colder than I expected. "You chose your path long ago. You chose money and reputation over your own son. Now I choose mine. I choose the real family who stood by me when I had nothing. I'm sorry, I can't help you." They stammered, pleaded, cried, tried to grab my hands. I called security and had them politely escorted out. When the door closed, I stood at the window and watched them leave the building in despair, shoulders slumped, steps heavy. I didn't feel pain anymore. I felt only immense relief, as though I had finally set down a burden of rejection I had carried for over 30 years. From that day on, I cut all contact. No calls, no messages, no looking back. I poured myself like never before into the future, into the ever-growing Davenport Group, into Alara, the woman who chose me when the whole world turned away, and into the new life Uncle Ben had trusted me to live. The years that followed unfolded like a beautiful dream I had never dared to imagine. Under my leadership, Davenport Group truly entered its golden era. We no longer confined ourselves to real estate and infrastructure alone. I expanded into green technology, renewable energy, and AI-driven software projects that supported sustainable construction. The strategies I implemented, focusing on people, on responsible innovation, on giving back to the community, quickly propelled the group to new heights. Revenue doubled, stock prices reached all-time highs, and the Davenport Group became a symbol of sustainable growth in America. The press called me the perfect successor. I only smiled. I knew it was all because Uncle Ben had been right to place his final trust in a kid who had once been so desperate he saw no way out. One spring afternoon, beneath cherry blossoms in full bloom in the mansion garden, Ilara and I held our wedding. Nothing extravagant, no thousands of guests, just a few dozen of the people closest to us, my old team from the days when my tiny company was on the brink of collapse, a handful of college friends, and my new family, Callum and Carter with their wives and children. Alara wore a simple white dress, hair loose and flowing, so beautiful I could barely speak my vows. We exchanged rings in front of Uncle Ben, threw the large photograph on a small altar beside one of Grandfather Leonard. On our wedding night, lying side by side, Alara whispered, "I once thought I'd never trust anyone again. Then you came and changed everything." I kissed her forehead. "Uncle Ben and you saved me from the darkness." Our family life became filled with a peace I had never known. We had 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. They grew up surrounded by real love and nightly hugs in the fairy tales I told in the warm voice Grandfather Leonard once used with me. I taught them how to fish, how to judge people by their hearts instead of their wallets. They would never hear, "You're a disgrace," or "Look at so-and-so's kid." They only knew that their parents loved them without conditions. The very thing I had been starved of as a child, I now gave them in abundance. Once everything was solid, once Davenport Group had become the undisputed market leader no one could shake, I established a scholarship foundation called Leonard and Ben. The foundation supported bright students from poor backgrounds, kids with big dreams but no means. Each year we selected hundreds, granting full-ride scholarships and even jobs after graduation. I personally interviewed many of them. Looking into their eyes, I saw my old self, drowning in debt and despair. I told them, "Don't give up. Even if the whole world turns away, someone will still see that you are worthy." The foundation quickly became the most important part of the spiritual legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not money, not skyscrapers, but lives changed, dreams given wings. Every autumn, when the leaves turned gold, Alara, the children, and I visited the graves of Grandfather Leonard and Uncle Ben. We brought white lilies, homemade chocolate chip cookies made from Uncle Ben's old recipe, and new stories about the toddler's first steps, about a project that just succeeded, about scholarships just awarded. My children ran and laughed around the graves, calling them Great-Grandpa and Grandpa, though they had never met neither. I stood before the 2 stone markers, holding Alara's hand tightly. I always remembered the journey, from the moment I sat frozen among piles of debt notices, from the rainy night my own parents threw me out, from the days I was crushed until I could barely breathe, to the moment I found new faith in Uncle Ben's gentle smile. I knew in my bones that without Grandfather Leonard's unconditional love and Uncle Ben's unwavering trust, I would never be standing here today, not as the chairman of a billion-dollar conglomerate, but as a man who knows how to love, how to cherish, how to give back. Those memories remind me never to forget my roots, never to abandon honesty no matter how brutally life beats me down, never to forget the power of kindness, values I will protect no matter the cost. I teach my children those lessons every day. Family isn't always the people who share your blood, I tell them. Family is the people who see your worth when the whole world looks away. The people willing to give you a chance when you have nothing left. And standing before the graves of the 2 men who saved me, I whisper to myself, and to the generations after me, kindness can change an entire life, and I am the clearest proof of that. The autumn breeze moved gently through the cemetery, carrying the scent of lilies and falling leaves. I smiled, squeezed Alara's hand tighter, and led our children home. The new life had truly begun, and I knew somewhere Grandfather Leonard and Uncle Ben were smiling down,